Hello, everyone. This is Tom Villaro. Welcome to FormIt Friday, our fourth edition. And I also have with me Tobias Hathorn.
Good morning, everybody.
And I just arrived home from the Boulder office where we spent 3 days doing planning. And I'm happy to say we have a lot of really exciting stuff right now, just sitting on a whiteboard, but we'll soon be arriving in the FormIt app near you. But on that note, before we get into the content for today, I did want to say that we actually do have an update today. Perfect timing. We released an update to all of our clients, so the web, iOS, and Android. For the most part, it's been some bug fixing and things that we found since our last release in May. But on the website, which we'll show today, I have a little screenshot on our blog here. We have a pretty exciting set of UI updates to our content library, which is very timely for the topic for the day. So we'll go into that a little bit, and also a timely update on the FormIt converter, which if you click from our website, click the download tab in the navigation bar, you will go to a download page where you can grab the FormIt Converter Revit add-in, which we'll also show you today. We just released that also in May. So if you missed that update, this is what we're going to be a big part of what we're going to be covering today. So you can just go to our website, formit360.autodesk.com, and click download, and you'll be able to download that and install that add-in into your Revit 2015, and we're also working right on a 2016 version, which we'll have out soon.
It's
Also,
nice,
yeah, go
Tom,
ahead.
that you have you added the email there too, so that we can let you know when there's an update to that.
Yes, thank you for the reminder.
That's
Right,
pretty
so
handy.
in this little bar here, if you want to be basically join our newsletter, which we'll be doing um, between once and twice a month, depending on content that we have. You can put your email address in here, and we'll keep you guys up to date on webinars and updates to not only the add-in but other news FormIt 360 related. We also have our gallery, so a couple of cool things have come in on the gallery recently. Marcus Bond, who's one of our senior software developers and also an architect by training, did this great kind of Corbusier chaise lounge. But he also just the other day added some construction photos. He actually built this
Nice.
entire chaise lounge um, using his FormIt file. So which is beautiful. Just
Wow.
wanted to remind everybody to go to if you have some projects that you would like to share, you can go to this gallery and upload images as well. And also, just a reminder to follow us on Twitter at FormIt360. We just posted, speaking of planning, I posted this image last week. If you're not following us on Twitter, this is the type of stuff you're missing, which is we have this every once in a while. I like to show what we have going on in our development version. So this is a non-photorealistic sketchy line shader that we're working on. So this is a little hint of what's to come this summer. We are working a lot on graphics and presentation styles to really make your work really look beautiful inside FormIt 360. So little tease of what's to come. And then there was also this showed up. If anyone follows the Gravity Shades of Gray blog, Andy Milburn does some amazing in-depth blogging on a lot of our tools, specifically Revit related, but he decided to take a little spin at FormIt 360. So this was kind of cool. I'll let you guys take a look at this. And he kind of really went into some detail on this Casa Fascio project, which he had done previously in Revit. Um, okay, so that was just kind of a quick overview of what's going on out in the world. Tobias, did I miss anything in terms of updates?
No, that's great. This Casa Fascio post was really interesting. um, I think it's great seeing what other people are starting to do, especially kind of his comments there about first bumblings and like stuff he's learning as he's going through the process. It's just really helpful for everybody when people are starting to post their learnings, and it's not just us trying to tell people through the webinars. It's great.
Right. And I like this at the very end, sort of saying spiky stuff works. So he made this. He was actually surprised himself that this stuff came into Revit with mask floors and levels applied. So that was kind of a pleasant surprise for him. So which is great because that's a big part of what we're
Yeah, the
trying to.
vertex, totally. The vertex editing and a lot of, I mean, we were showing the sweep tool to some people this morning and their reaction of like, whoa, that sweep tool is easier to use than it is in Revit. It's like, good.
Yeah.
We
um,
did our job.
yes. So what we're going to talk about today is the format converter that I talked about. So what we've done, I can just kind of play this video in the background a little bit. So what we, as many of you know, you can anytime you save a file in Format 360, it saves a Revit file in the cloud. But we've also been developing some other technology to do some other more advanced conversions. So specifically, Sketchup converting a Sketchup file into a format file, and also converting Revit families. And we also got some feedback that people, they like the cloud conversion, but also want to have a little bit more control over what they do with the content in Revit. So, for instance, and I'll show this in a minute, but wanting to be able to, for instance, bring some work that you've done into your own template file, for instance. So we decided to experiment with creating a Revit add-in that would allow you to do a little bit more converting type workflows than you can do in the cloud version. And so that's why we're delivering this as a separate download and as a separate add-in. So if you go here and download that and install it, I'll switch over to my Windows machine. I have this um, installed in Revit, and let me just start a new file here. And what this installs is under the add-ins tab, it'll say Format 360 conversion, and you get basically what I call the Swiss Army knife here. This menu allows you to convert um, Revit RFA families to format files, convert a format sketch, so an AXM file that you created in format, to a Revit file, which we'll talk about. That's basically doing a very similar thing that happens in the cloud, but allows you to load it into your own template. And also, really interestingly, and Tobias will run through this, is converting SketchUp files that you may have into format files that are completely editable that you can then bring into format. And just another reminder, feel free to ask questions in the question pane inside the GoToWebinar window, and we will try to get to those as we go, and also leaving a little bit of time at the end. Okay, so the first converter, so converting RFA content, and the SketchUp converter works very similarly. Basically what this will do is you point it to a folder that's, and it can also have subfolders of a bunch of any number of RFA files, and then just create another folder where you wanted to put your format files. And then you can also optionally say this checkbox, upload that content to your A360 Drive folder, which will use, I'm pointing over here at the top right, it'll use your Revit login to upload those to your format file in a subfolder called content in A360. I'm not going to go through this. It's a little bit boring to watch. It'll take a little time. It opens each file, and but it's pretty fast. I did about, I don't know, I didn't time it, but I did about 30 files this morning, and took, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes.
Hey,
Probably.
Tom,
Yeah,
can you go back into that dialogue real quick?
sure.
There's one sort of, we added some text there about only Revit families of the following categories will be converted.
Oh, right,
So that's pretty helpful to point out. Like you can point to your entire content library, but we'll only convert these categories currently.
right. Great point. And that's because what we'll show you is what we're trying to do is right now we're dealing mostly with essentially standalone family categories, things like furniture, entourage, and then also generic models as well, that can just basically live on their own without any aspect of hosting. Okay, so I'll just show the folder that I converted. Let me go to box, and this is just a local. So this RFA folder and all its subfolders. So some of this is some content that I had from some other projects, and some of this is some stock Revit content that comes in the install. So what I did is I checked the checkbox, and I have a local in my C drive here. I have another folder called AXM. So all this stuff, and you'll see these are actually called AXMF for family. Essentially, they're basically just FormIt files. And then if I switch over to my browser, and I've loaded this existing project that Tobias did, and probably should create a few more. Like this is a great. I love this sketch, but we should probably create a few more because I'm running the risk of overusing this example. So. But it's
I know it's funny. This was a real project, and like the design has changed so much since since this project,
right.
since this phase. So it's kind of funny. It'd be nice to update it. I agree.
Yeah, you have to give me the updated version. Um, so what I'm going to do if I go, let's see, move this out of the way. So in FormIt, we have this on the tab on the right here, this content library. And what I've done is I've already linked this, and I'll show that workflow in a second. But one thing we've just added this just the past 2 days, which is something we had on the iOS iPad version, is a default library. So this is just some kind of stock Revit content that you're probably, if you're a Revit user, are familiar with. And we just wanted to kind of give you a little a starting set of data that you can play with. And this number in the top right, actually, if it's Revit content that's been converted, that conversion process that the add-in does will actually take any types that may exist in the Revit file and actually create a separate set of individual FormIt files for each of those types. But this UI is nice. It actually consolidate those into essentially what you kind of think of as a type selector, essentially. So if I want to place any of this content, I can choose. So I'm going to choose this queen bed, and then there it is. I'm going to place it there. But let's say I want a twin or double for this other room. I can place that as well. So what I've done here, essentially placed a group that is copied from the Revit file, and it's right now it's editable FormIt geometry. So it's not, don't necessarily think of it as like I've fully imported a Revit file into this. What I've done is I've imported a set of geometry, but if I edit the group, and it's going to give me a little message that says any changes made to this group will be reverted when it's replaced by the original Revit file. And we'll show that a little bit later. Now I can go and I can, kind of edit this, make that pillow crazy. Hi. And what will happen is when this gets converted back into Revit, it'll go back to its original state. But what's interesting here is I've edited the group, I just
So
double clicked it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, It is a two-step process. So if the conversion back to Revit, and sorry, you'll probably end up showing this, but you could leave the family with that big pillow if you wanted. And then there's a separate step that you can do to swap it back into its original Revit state.
Yeah. Right. Right. Good point. And we'll show that in a little bit. And this is actually what the key aspect here is, that when you edit the group, you actually what we've added here is the ability to categorize FormIt groups using this limited set of essentially Revit categories. And also, it's also holding onto a little bit of metadata about its name, basically referencing back to that original RFA file that created it. And that'll be important for when we do the conversion back. Okay, so I've placed those. I'm gonna go through now. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna link a library. I've already done it, so which is why I have all these thumbnails. But when you first run FormIt, this will be empty. And I have two choices here. Well, I should say I have two choices when I'm running Chrome. One little detail is when you're running Firefox, you won't actually have this local library choice. Is that correct, Tobias? Is that still true?
Yeah, that's true. Firefox just does A360, and Chrome gives you the option for local library. Yeah.
Okay. So what I can do here is I can choose the I can go to that local library that I've synchronized here. It's just sitting on my desktop. Or I can just say A360, and this will automatically link to this folder in my drive, which is FormIt/content. So this view is just my A360 view. And then if I go back, I've linked it. I'll basically get a view of everything. And what's another thing we added just today is the ability to actually browse subfolders. So this is really nice. So I actually have some subfolders in there, like tables, and it's refreshing just to kind of read in for the first time. This is the first time I'm accessing it. It's going to actually go through, read in all those files from my A360 folder, and create thumbnails for them. So if I go back to tables here, and I'm going to choose, I think it's still thinking in the background there. Let's go back to, let's just try to refresh it here. So that refresh button will actually say, go back and actually refresh everything from the collection. So if you've made some changes, like you manually uploaded some files or did another conversion with the add-in, this little refresh button will actually go back and rebuild your content library for you. Okay. So let's try this. So I'm going to choose a 36 diameter, and it's going to load that for me, and then there, boom, I've placed it. And I'm going to do another little trick just to kind of show another tool that we released last May, which is the Radial Array tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to browse again and go to seating. And that little R icon is just telling you that this has been converted, just identifying it as a piece of Revit content that's been converted. going to place that chair. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and choose array, and then choose radial array, and choose the center of the table.
Nice.
And there we have it, a little seating area. And it's the same thing. If I double click on this chair and go to its properties, you'll see it's identifying itself as this table of furniture category. Now, Tobias, is it correct that if this has been converted, that's why it's not going to let me change the category?
Yeah, that's right. If it's been converted from Revit, it's not going to let you change it. So that way it's able to remap it back in Revit.
Okay, yeah. So you don't want to. I'm not going to just. We're not going to. It's not going to let me just recategorize this as entourage or something, right? Because we want to make sure that we have some continuity when we convert it. But Tobias will show you how to actually do a little bit more custom creation on your own that you can then remap to any one of these categories. So we'll show you that as well. So now basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this, and it's going to save it. It's going to save it as an AXM file, and I'm going to switch back over to Windows. Now I'm going to do another little Emerald Lagasse thing here, and actually already have it loaded, just because it does also, like the conversion, takes a little bit of time, and I don't want to bore everybody with watching the Revit progress bar move. So I'll go over to, so this is the file that I've converted. And let me go to a 3D view. And just to show you, just to kind of refresh everyone's memory of what you get, all of these, the geometry that was in that file previously come in as editable masses. So they'll say modify mass category. But in the case of things like those windows that were created, those are mass families, but anytime a group has been copied, like in the case of these stairs or in the case of these windows, you actually get a mass family, and then you get a bunch of instances of that mass family. So I can, I could go in and edit this mass basically, and then refresh it in the project. But now, interesting thing about the content that we loaded, so let me select that. It came through as furniture category. It's still geometry, okay? So it's categorized correctly. But if I go in and edit this guy and look at it, it is, it came through as a bunch of family extrusions that you would get if you were creating a family from scratch. But the last step I want to do is I want to actually then map back to that original RFA file. So what I'm going to do is go back to the add-in and choose the second button, which is Reload Families. And now what I'm going to do is browse to a local or network path, if you guys have been pathed to a network drive in your office. And I'm going to go to Box where I have them. Content. And I'm going to choose RFA. Now this is actually where all those chairs and beds and tables are located. I'm going to say OK. So it says reload family succeeded. Content of this project is replaced with the original Revit families. Now if I go, and you'll see those chairs even changed to their yellow material. If I choose that bed now, it's bed box queen. So this is, and if I edit the family and go to like the rough floor plan level, so you're going to see now it's the actual family. So the way this could be used is it essentially gives you a way that you could give a bunch of Revit content to make it available for someone to use in a, let's say, a fit out scenario where they might not want to be or not be able to use Revit. They could use FormIt to do some of this basic interior layouts, and then essentially create a Revit file from that you could then not only create a nice Revit file, but also map those back to the original content, basically with two steps. Whereas, as many of you have told us, it's a very painful process now to have to do that in something like another modeling tool and then have to essentially recreate all of that in Revit. So Tobias, do we have any questions? I'm assuming. Ooh, there's lots. Do we want to
Yeah,
pause?
there's been a few. I've kind of been answering them online
Okay.
as you've been going, but one comment, if you are Emerald, perhaps we need to hear a bam out of you,
Okay. I'll
especially
do that
after
next
just doing that conversion back into the, yeah, totally.
time.
Um, that that
Bam.
was awesome. So that was the second step that I was talking about before, that you can modify your Revit files if you want, and then inform it, and then when they come back, you can keep that modification, or you can swap them back to their kind of original parametric uh, base. So you kind of have that option. We don't do that for you right away. So that's kind of cool. And the other comment I had just about the plugin and that swapping back step is that you really have to map to the same folder that you originally exported from. Like you can't drill down and just convert one folder or just one chunk of content. The system remembers exactly the path that you gave it the first time. So that's kind of a gotcha that you got to be careful about.
That's a great point. So let me just go back and do that. So if I choose this converter again, this path is what you're saying is this gets remembered essentially, that top level path that I
Yep.
chose, right? So you really have to be, and this and obvious other things apply. Like if you changed, or if an RFA file goes missing or gets renamed, obviously then those will not get remapped. It's kind of like blocks back in the AutoCAD days, right? It's like those, if the reference doesn't exist, or like a Revit link, right? If reference doesn't exist, it won't be there.
Yep. Yeah. There's a comment about materials too, and we get this question a lot when we're doing this demo. So I don't know if you want to talk about, kind of our materials library strategy for the next several months.
Yeah, well, I mean, so right. So right now, obviously, FormIt has its own material library. One thing we are working on as we speak is actually implementing a limited subset of the Autodesk Materials library so that we can then actually map those materials back to Revit. So yeah, we are working on that, but don't have that ready to show just yet.
Yeah, that was a good one. Another question came in about subfolders. So um, whichever sort of hierarchy you build out on your side, either on the local library or even an A360 library, if you've got subfolders, then that folder structure is maintained when it reads in FormIt. So when Tom goes to the browse button there in the content library, what you see is exactly the form file structure that you've already created. So we're not doing any reformatting. It's whatever, however you like to structure your content. That's what we're displaying in FormIt.
Right, exactly. So I think we can maybe move on to show the SketchUp import workflow. I mean, one other thing I was going to show, and Tobias, let me know if you were going to show this too, but I was going to just kind of show how you could take some custom FormIt content and actually categorize it manually.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah,
Uh,
this is like the placeholder workflow, basically.
Right. So I kind of I'll show this real quickly. I think you might show kind of a similar variation of this workflow, but basically I kind of just created this real rough couch, right? And this might just be kind of um, something I kind of want to just block out so I can it's the basic dimensions, looks like a couch. So um, then what I can do is when I edit the group, and basically what this is just two extrusions, and then I can actually name it and then categorize it. And in here you can see I can actually categorize it whatever I want. So I'm going to keep it furniture, and then all right, this gives me an opportunity to do the BAM thing here. Hold on. So all right, I'll actually show it. Let's see. So I'm going to say convert FormIt 360 sketch to Revit. Pre-downloaded it. And then bam, couch.
Nice.
So now you'll notice what happens if it's the same thing as that bed before. It's going to say, um, it's the let's see if it's modified, it's family category. Now, one thing we haven't really experimented too much with, but what you could do is essentially use this then as a starting point for a family. So I haven't really experimented yet with. I mean, what's cool about it is when you tag that as furniture in FormIt, it actually comes through as real family extrusions, not mass conceptual masses. So this is basically a extrusion inside a furniture family. So I could potentially start to use this as a starting point for a real family. So you could give this as kind of, you think of it as like sketching out the basic idea of a family in FormIt, and then bringing it in, kind of then using it as a way of sort of templatizing your work quickly into a family file, instead of having to go through like importing a mesh or something. So I just wanted to show that real quickly. I think just to keep things moving along here, I'm going to hand it back over to Tobias, and he's going to show you doing a very similar thing, but really powerful part of this workflow with SketchUp files. So let me hand over the mantle. Okay.
Cool.
Stage is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great, Tom. That was awesome. I've seen a question from Craig on the GoTo, and sorry if I can't figure out the UI to answer it, but he was asking if these are being recorded, and they are. They're up on YouTube. You can just search either for FormIt Friday or just find the FormIt 360 channel. We're posting them all there, so feel free to go back and share these with people in your office, or rewatch them and listen to our great jokes multiple times and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the SketchUp workflow and moving stuff. There's kind of three different scales of importing stuff from SketchUp that I'm going to hit on. One is importing like a building scale project, and then the other is hitting sort of furniture or like component scale importing, and then the other is importing terrain data, like site terrain data into FormIt. Basically, at the building scale, this is a demo that we were showing at AIA. This is a file that we found at the SketchUp warehouse. It's pretty beautiful geometry. This is what it looks like after doing the conversion from SketchUp into FormIt. This illustrates a lot of pretty cool stuff. Like, here's what it looks like in SketchUp, and here's what it looks like in FormIt. Pretty high fidelity. And we get asked a lot if this geometry is editable, and it is. We're basically turning that SketchUp, rather than an import, into real FormIt data, so that I can grab a face and drag it out like you would with pretty much any FormIt element. So your model lives on, the integrity of the model lives on, the groupiness of your model lives on too. So if I double-click this bench, you can see this is the same way that we do groups in FormIt, that you can grab a face in this one and edit it, and it'll update other things. I guess in this case they didn't. Oh, they did. They mirrored it. So if I drag this face again, you can see the one in the back corner is adjusting. So it's been rotated, copy rotate. But anyway, the hierarchy of the construction of that file is maintained. So groups stay groups, and the intelligence that's built into that component is the same as well. So if I swing around, you can see that was updated over there. And then lastly, the materials come across from SketchUp when they can. So there's one trick with this that I'll talk about in just a minute, but In the case that you've set up materials and applied them directly onto an object in SketchUp, then we'll pull those materials in to FormIt as well. So that's this file. Close that one. And let me show one other kind of building scale import. This is something that Scott Davis was kind enough to share with us, some demo data set that he's put together. And you can see this is a pretty large scale import. The materials are mapped on to these surfaces, and those are all coming across. So this file ends up being 21 megs in FormIt, like it's a 21 megabyte .axm file, and I'm able to open it in the browser and save it and do some work with it. So I do want to, kind of caution about working at this scale and expecting importing at this scale to be a great experience. We are in a web browser. There is memory footprint limitations. So I'm not saying this is going to be the best experience in the world, but you can give it a whirl. You can give it a try. We did have one learning from a customer who was kind enough to share their file with us and kind of took a look at it. They had a super detailed material map in their SketchUp file, and it was, I don't know, probably like a 4 megabyte PNG image or JPEG image. And as we're doing that conversion process, that material goes into memory and ends up ballooning the size of the file to something too large for FormIt to read in. So that's kind of just a tip and trick to share with you. If you've got tame materials, kind of regular sized bitmaps, you'll probably be fine. But one thing to look out for is if the conversion isn't working out for you, maybe you have a really, really large texture in your file. All right, so that's kind of working at the building scale. Go ahead and drop those out of there and take a look at the furniture scale. So this is one. This is to illustrate kind of a couple of gotchas and that I've learned just in the testing and process of showing people the SketchUp conversion. So in SketchUp, this is what this file looks like. Again, I found it on the SketchUp warehouse. Pretty beautiful furniture vignette. And you bring it over to FormIt, and it looks like this. So in this case, we actually lose the materials as they come over. And the reason for that is the way that materials were applied in SketchUp. So they give you the power, the ability to dump a material as an instance override rather than as a material on a particular piece of geometry. So like this is a component, and if you just select the component, you can apply a material onto the component. And when that happens, we're not able to display that material yet. That's functionality we're adding in, that we will be able to read that material if it's as an override. But right now that's not working. So just want to point that out. Materials don't always come across because of the multiple ways that you can apply materials in SketchUp. The other thing I want to show is some of the extra jaggy lines that you're seeing here are also in the SketchUp file. And so this is kind of a common sense thing, but you probably just need to know it and be told it a couple of times, is it's a garbage in, garbage out kind of system that if I'm in SketchUp and I go over here to my edge styles, the edges are actually turned off in this particular scene right now. So if I turn those edges on, you'll see that it gets pretty messy in here too. I don't know how this file was created. I just got it from the warehouse, but my guess is it was probably not even modeled in SketchUp, but just imported into SketchUp. And as a result, you get a lot of just extra faces, extra edges, kind of bad looking arc construction in here. And so FormIt's not going to fix that for you on the import. We're just going to bring the geometry as it is. So you'll get those same kind of crummy looking geometry, crummy looking lines over here. And there's really not much you can do about that. So if you want to use SketchUp content, you're going to kind of have to deal with what's there. This is an opportunity to show you a pretty cool built-in feature. If you go to the gear, the settings, down at the last option there is model diagnostics. That sounds pretty technical, but really all it is giving you a way to kind of check out the health, the geometric health of your model. So watertight issues, is a good way to describe that. Watertight just kind of, is this a solid? Is this geometry a solid, or are there extraneous lines, extraneous spaces, kind of messy geometry that's going to impact the importing into Revit later? And the case here is yes, there is extra stuff going on. So this will kind of help you identify where those problems are and if there are problems. So that's kind of what it's there for. It's not really a beautiful visual style like sketchy lines or ambient occlusions, but it's kind of a way for you to diagnose, is your model healthy or is it not? So with this model, you can see there's some issues. So I'd expect there to be some problems bringing that forward into Revit too. So that's just kind of a couple of gotchas with the workflow. Garbage in, garbage out. So go ahead and close that tab and move on to the next piece I want to cover. And this is something that I posted earlier this week on our forums. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware. We've got a forum and a community place where people can jump in. Scott's answering questions. I took some time and wrote this diatribe here about how to go through the conversion process, and again, some of the gotchas and some of the steps that are there. So this is for everybody on the call to go and check out. There's links to this particular post on our blog, but I'll kind of go through some of these steps in the next few minutes.
Hey, Tobias.
So yeah, go for it.
So the one question just before you get into it, one sort of fundamental question was like, why would you do this? Like, why would you want to bring in content from SketchUp?
Yeah, probably a lot of different answers. The first thing that pops into mind is just volume. There's a ton of content that exists out here. If you don't have a bunch of Revit content already created, here's one way to just go get a bunch for free. Other people have taken a bunch of time to model stuff, so it's available. That's one thing. I think the preferred workflow is obviously what Tom showed earlier. If you've got Revit content, then by all means use that. But if your office has created a bunch of SketchUp content over the years, over time, you've got a bunch of custom materials associated with that, you don't have to give up on that. It's not dead content. You can continue to push this forward into your Revit workflow. And what I'll show next is actually showing you how to make that into Revit content if you wanted to. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that, Tom.
No, I think that's a good way to put it. And and also people should get back to us about ways they would or wouldn't want to do this, or share with us examples of what you're trying to do, and that's always helpful.
Totally, yeah. Let us know what's working, what's not working, and the forum is a great place to get a hold of us. We see each post as it's posted, so we're able to get back to you pretty quickly. So yeah, 3D Warehouse. I came here and grabbed a couple of tables and a cabinet, and then converted it. So I can show you what it looks like in SketchUp. Go ahead and close this file. Don't save that one. All right, so I brought these into SketchUp just so you could see kind of what they look like after downloading from the warehouse. So they're components. You can double-click to go inside of them and see other component structures. You can double-click to go inside of that. Just your regular old content, kind of what you would expect. And then after going through the conversion process, this is how they appear in FormIt as well. So you can double-click to go inside a piece of content. And by default, we do not, so these are the properties that Tom was talking about. We kind of enhanced our palette over here off to the side for this last release. And so the properties palette is the first tab here. And you'll just see a lot of sort of contextual information applied there. So if you're familiar with Revit and the way the properties palette works there, it's pretty similar. So you can select a piece of content, and you'll get instance properties for this guy. So the name of the file is read in by FormIt, and then here's the options for using levels and the area and volume for it and stuff like that. But if I drill into this, go into edit group mode, then I've got some additional properties. So this is the distinction between instance instance in group that you can go ahead and name the group itself. I called it table 2, and right now I have it set for category mass, which is the default. And Tom was showing how we've got these other options there. I'm going to leave this as mass just to illustrate something further down the road. But now if I go and do a Control-C and a Control-V and put this file here, double-click it, you'll see the same sort of group properties are maintained. The name is the same, and that's the same. So that's kind of the idea. When you go into this guy, you can see it's called Table 1, and it's of the category Furniture. And if I go into this guy, I've named it Cabinet and set the category for Furniture there as well. I'll do a quick illustration of something important, kind of a gotcha step here, that if you've got nested groups in your families, either your FormIt stuff or your Sketchup stuff. So like if I double click to go into this and I hover, I see this dot pattern on my element. That means it's a group. So right now I'm at the top level of this table and it's telling me it's of the category mass, and I can't adjust this. Like if I wanted to call this table 2 and rename it, I can only choose mass as my category. I can't do anything else. And the reason for that is this little helper text, mass group can't be nested in a non-mass group. So that means I kind of need to drill down further and find this subcomponent. And I kind of have two options. I could either name the subcomponent, like table legs, and then set that to be furniture, which is totally fine. Or I can just select it and ungroup it. Like, you don't need to maintain the nested group structure if you don't want to. So go ahead and ungroup, and now I'm able to change that to whatever category I want. So the trick is just there with nested families. By default, they're set for mass, and so they won't, at the top level, let you convert the category. So just a little FYI there. All right, so I've got these guys. I've saved them locally. Or save them to A360. Either a Revit file gets created for me, or I can go into Revit and create my own version of it. So I'll go over to my remote desktop and log back in. And I've converted these guys, bam, Emerald style, into my Revit file. So now if I hover over this, you can see that on the tooltip, just like you would expect in Revit, that this is now of the category furniture, and it's cabinet, and this is the other table that we set. It's called table 1. It's of the category furniture. And this guy, who we didn't change the category, is still set to mass, table 2. So that's the gist of it. Like Tom was saying, now I could essentially swap this guy out if I wanted to, for a desk or any other type of furniture, because now they share a category. I could also swap it back into this piece of content. So now I've essentially built some smarts into my SketchUp content. Now it's a category. Now I can jump out to the family editor and start to do some more parametrics with it here if I wanted to. And that could also be setting the material right now, because on the Revit side, we're not doing any material translation. So that's just a quick way to take your existing SketchUp content, your existing SketchUp library, and bring it across into Revit for future editing. And we take it for granted, but now if I jump into the family editor for this guy, like, this is a real piece of content, a real piece of Revit geometry that I can start to work with. Can either, oops, that didn't work out so hot with that guy. But the geometry comes across as actual Revit elements that you can start to continue to manipulate. So
Yeah,
that's pretty helpful for keeping your stuff going down the road.
So Tobias, this is, I mean, that's
ahead, Tom.
another good example of, it's actually essentially a better way of bringing in existing SketchUp data that you might have than the kind of stock Revit SketchUp converter, because that'll just kind of bring it in as a mesh that you can't really do much with.
Right.
So that's just it's sort of another way that you can. We're just giving you another option for how you could bring in data.
Yeah,
There were some other questions.
I wasn't cool.
What one was like you showed one of your tweets, I think you showed a tree made up of lines. So the question is, I think someone tried it and said they could not convert model lines. Is this consistent?
Yeah, I need to test that one out. You can bring model lines from FormIt into Revit. I know that the lines are maintained, but I'm not so sure about model lines and families being converted back to FormIt. So that's something I wrote down as a note to test out.
Okay.
The last thing I wanted to share before we run out of time or ask a few more questions was terrain, because we get this question a lot from people, starting off new projects. They're used to this kind of workflow in SketchUp that you just use Google Earth, the free component that comes with SketchUp, and you're able to get a little bit of terrain data right off the bat. Um, Using the SketchUp importer, you can basically do the same thing. So this is an example file I put together. There's no geometry in here, I guess, except for the scale dude. Um, but all it is that terrain data. You can see this corner is lipped up just a little bit. So mostly a flat site, but a little bit of rise there. You can bring that across, doing the same steps into FormIt. So this gives you an illustration of what's actually happening there on the site. As I hover under it, you can see that's the same lip there on the corner. So that's above grade. And then as I go below grade, you can see that there's this other piece that's actually below the sort of 0, 0 line of the ground. And if I drag this straight up, you can see that that's all there, brought across. So this is a pretty cheap way to get terrain data into FormIt for you to start working on your project, with a little bit of actual site instead of just the flat site. And that's about it for demo stuff with SketchUp.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a few more questions. I mean, one was, does for the converter, does Revit need to be running? And it does. But one thing we're looking at is expanding our current Revit cloud service converter cloud service to add some of this ability in as part of that service in the future. So that would be in the future you'd be able to do it without Revit or even really needing to have Revit at all. So, but the purpose of the add-in was for us to test out some of this functionality first, and also to give you the ability to work with it directly inside Revit. So there was another question: is there any
Cool.
plans on adding layers to FormIt? So you guys are hitting on all the topics we were talking about last week when we were together in Boulder. So yeah, it's something we're looking at a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, totally. That's probably my biggest request too, just as a SketchUp or as a FormIt user, that I really want to be able to turn the roof off of my house so I can look inside of it and start to model out those interiors. So yeah, it's coming for sure. I did see one other comment or question was about tooltips. And if you're not seeing tooltips, that's bad. You should see tooltips as you hover. We've actually built the keyboard shortcuts if they're exposed for the tool into the tooltip too. So as you hover over like this rectangle, you should see an R for that one. And if you right click to get to the context menu, you should see different tools there will also have a tooltip and their keyboard shortcut associated with it. So that's pretty helpful for getting started. I totally agree.
I think
The sweep tool.
Tobias, I think that
So,
they maybe were thinking like expanded tooltips with some more information. Um,
yeah, that'd be cool.
that's how I interpreted the question. So, but that yeah, that would be. But no, it's good to show that at least it has the keyboard shortcuts on web too.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you're using the mobile devices, right, there's no like tooltip sort of mechanism there, so that's not as good, that's not as handy. But one thing I did see today when I was using the mobile was these sort of tooltips do come the kind of feedback about what kind of inference and snapping you've got. So right now I'm on the x-axis, and if you hover for a minute, you get that feedback. Same with this one about y-axis and z-axis. And then even as you come over to like on vertex and along edges, you'll start to get feedback about what kind of snapping you're about to do. So that's pretty handy about when, especially when you get pretty close to an edge versus a vertex where your snap is. So yeah, really good.
All right. Well, thank you,
Okay.
Tobias. I think we'll
Yeah, my pleasure. This was a really good one. Thanks everybody for the questions. This is awesome to see this kind of feedback.
yeah, just a couple. Will there be stylus incorporation into iOS? Boy, yeah, these are all hot topics. So we're looking into that, and
Yeah, totally.
so I haven't scheduled the next webinar yet. We may be scaling back a little bit during the summer as things slow down, but please stay tuned as we will be adding these. We will be doing more of these, and we've got a lot, especially as we have really cool stuff coming online, especially related to graphics. So thank you everybody for coming, and I will have the recording up on YouTube today, hopefully, or Monday at the latest, depending on how my day goes.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I did see a comment about, how did we do the custom curtain wall material a couple weeks ago? So that sounds like a nice blog post to put together, so we can teach many people how to fish. So I'll definitely put that on the to-do list as well.
Oh, great idea. Okay,
Cool,
everybody,
guys.
thank you for
Well,
joining us for FormIt Friday, and we will catch you all next time.
yep. Bye, everyone.